Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday, the 27th of March, and you are watching episode 126 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing insight on issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, the Northern Murray Darling Basin. Whose water is it? My guest is Glen Smith, owner of Evolution Farming and Mungindi ginning. Welcome, Glen.
G'day, Bill.
You didn't provide me with a great bio of that, so you need to give us a bit of an introduction to yourself in regards to maybe your misspent adventures as a youth and your farming history.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't like talking about myself too much, but my family were always farmers, and my parents and the like moved down to this region, west of Murray in the late 70s. So that's where I spent my early years in around Kingaroy, around peanuts, and then we moved out to this area when the Northern Valleys were being established. So and then we've been in this region ever since. So I guess yeah. So and then me personally, it's I mean, I've always been passionate about farming. I love farming. I love machinery. I love water, and I love what we do. But these days, you start to wonder when the bureaucracy just drives you insane. But anyway.
So, in regards to your family's history, was it sort of always a mixed farming or grazing, what's your line of products these days?
Well, I guess my grandparents were probably more developers. They used to buy rundown dairies and things and get them established, and there was, and then I guess peanuts was our main thing around that Kingaroy region. So, yeah, that was our background.
And you've moved on to cotton, but now.
Yeah, well, so in the 70s. In the 70s, our state government had the foresight to build a few dams here. So we had Glen, Pindari, Copton, Keepit, which are the backbone of these regions. And after they'd constructed the dams, then they needed to get an industry developed. And the industry that was chosen was cotton, because cotton had just sort of started. And yeah, so there was our state governments were encouraging people like us to come and start to develop farms and build an industry, because it's always difficult to start an industry from scratch because you don't have any of the infrastructure. And without infrastructure, you can't grow the crops, and without crops, you can't build infrastructure. So it's always a challenge to get kicked off.
I suppose one of the things is interesting in your case is that your township, Mungindi, straddles the border of New South Wales and Queensland.
Yeah.
I'll just put up a screen share. Yeah, Andrew, can we have screen share? Maybe can't give you a screen share yet.
Yeah, so I always, you can see it on the map behind you. Actually, Mungindi is right where the squiggly line goes straight on the Queensland-New South Wales border.
Yeah, I've got it now. So thanks, Andrew. So we've got the little township, and it straddles the border. It's east of Mungindi. And your ginning mill is down well into New South Wales.
Yep.
So how do you cope with being a farmer both sides of the border?
To be honest, it's Mungindi is a fairly unique town. It's only a small town, but we do straddle the border, as you said. So we've got 2 police stations. We've got our hospitals in Queensland, and one of our kindies in Queensland, and yet most of our other infrastructure is in New South Wales. The town, I mean, generally farming, that's not that big of an issue, but it's as a business person, it's quite challenging because it's you don't only have Queensland payroll tax, you've got to calculate New South Wales and Queensland, and all of those complications so it does get more and more challenging all the time. Probably one of the biggest challenges is the MacIntyre, or the Jamaican MacIntyre, which is our border here, is also the Queensland-New South Wales border. Half of our catchment's in Queensland and half of it's in New South Wales. So we have two states trying to run the one river, and that adds an enormous complexity. So,
but you'll also be faced with two regulators in a lot of instances in regards to your business, where you're operating north of the border, you're answerable to the state government of Queensland's regulations, and when you're down south of the border, you're answering to Sydney. So
yeah.
What that would sort of, to me, be a bit of an issue in regards to things from bookkeeping to regulation management and reporting and all that sort of stuff. It would be pretty burdensome.
It is very challenging. I guess I've grown up with it, so it's just kind of what I know. But you know, if trying to buy water in the two different states is two different rules. The taxation's treated differently. It's there's not much similar between the states, I can tell you. There's you know, generally speaking, I think our Queensland governments are much more willing to listen and probably a little bit more proactive. New South Wales can be, generally speaking, is bloody challenging to deal with. So
the other thing that happened is with water. There's been a lot of pressure on the Murray Darling Basin to provide more and more environmental flows, and I've had a number of discussions with people in the southern region and in South Australia on this issue, and they always seem to, well, the southern irrigators and also the irrigators in Victoria always seem to be a little bit upset in that they're sort of seem to be carrying, or they say they're carrying the burden in the most instance for these buybacks and the environmental water. Can you give us a bit of an idea where the northern people in the northern Murray Darling Basin, where they come into the picture and the pressure on them to sort of forego water for environmental flows?
My challenge with this whole issue is that particularly South Australian, and particularly our friends in the Southern Riverina, which is not everybody, it's just it's the small group that Chris Brooks associates with, love to blame everybody else, and I think that it's everybody else's fault and everybody else's job. And I don't know, I just until everybody can actually sit in a room together and discuss things rationally, I don't think anything will ever change. Unfortunately, the one thing I've learned in the Murray Darling Basin is that none of what happens has anything to do with science or with people or with communities. It's all to do with politics and votes. And unfortunately, we live in two of the safest seats in Australia, and we just get crumbs. So, but I mean, the big difference in the Murray Darling Basin is the southern Murray region has, dams like Hume and Dartmouth, dams that hold, I don't know what it is, 4.5 million megalitres. Like, they're big, they're enormous dams. They have the Murray River is an enormous river that's been highly modified with weirs and whatnot. They tend to have a much more reliable catchment because they have the reliable winter rainfall. We tend to live in the centre of Australia. We're north of the reliable winter rainfall, and we're south of the reliable monsoon. So sometimes we get none of it. Sometimes we get both of them. It's we live in a pretty sporadic weather system where we are. So The dams in our region here, like Hume, I think is about 4.5 million megs. Pindari is about 300,000. It's I don't know what that is, 7 or 8% the size of one of their dams down south. So we don't have reliable ongoing water. We have water turns up every now and then, and we have to use it when we've got it, and then we don't have water. That's the nature of our systems up here. Some of our rivers, like the Weir and the like, don't even have a dam on them. They are what they always were. When it rains, they run, and when it stops raining, they stop running. So our systems is very different to the southern regions, and even as much as I think the total flow in the Darling is only something like 15% of what flows in the Murray. It's like the volumes of water up here are very, very small, and they tend to come in big lumps. So like we just it's a very different region to compare it to the Murray. Like the fact that we're all lumped together is a bit odd, really.
Okay, I'll just share a couple of screens here, and we can talk to those. This is the whole Murray Darling Basin. It is fairly extensive, but like you say, the rivers in this northern section are a bit, you'd call intermittent, or when it rains you might get some, and when it doesn't you don't get any. But it does, on this map, it does look pretty impressive, the Darling and that. But like you say, the Murray carries much more water because it gets the runoff from the Snowies. It gets fed from the lower Alps in Victoria through the Goulburn and that, and of course you've got the flow from the back of through the Lachlan River and places like that. So it's fairly extensive. Although the Darling does look fairly impressive in this sort of representation that's in the Murray Darling guidebooks.
Yeah.
This is also the general regions that they're broken up into. And you would probably line up around this area here.
Yeah, so that's right. Yeah.
So you've got the border rivers, which is the MacIntyre, and like I say, you straddle the border there. These are some of the rivers to give people a bit of an idea. You're still seeing somewhere around here.
Yeah, just to the right of there, back just under where the M on the MacIntyre is.
Yeah. So you got Gundawundi up here somewhere.
Yep.
So these are the basically the border rivers here. The MacIntyre is the main one, and then you've got a whole range flowing into through the Barwon, and you're even getting it sort of almost from the start of central Queensland on the Warrego and Manora, and heading down south. So it still seems pretty impressive, but like you say, people don't seem to understand that the southern Murray is probably 4 or 5 times more in volume for the rainfall.
Yeah.
And this is a nice clear shot in regards to just the break for the northern basin and the southern basin.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like size, if you just look at the size, like the northern basin is equal to the southern basin, or may even be slightly bigger, I'm not sure. But it's just the fact that we don't have any mountains, and we don't have reliable rainfall. Just the total flows that come out of the north are quite small. I mean, certainly when it gets wet and it rains and we get flooding rains up here, then the Darling is quite an impressive system. But then, a few months later, it goes back to bugger all. So it's
being a creek. I suppose the thing it needs two situations to make it work well. Is they get the benefit from overspill from the monsoon and get a bit of winter rain from a bit coming from the south.
Yeah. And the system was. I mean, the Darling can be important trying to deliver water in the south because of the restrictions like the Barma Choke and some of the some of the other issues that they have when they're delivering water further down in the southern system. So, but unfortunately, and especially the last 20 years, we've been in a pretty dry series of years, and the volumes of water coming out of the north are not very big, other than a couple of big floods.
You're also saying that a lot of the sort of storage, well, there's no real great storage on the rivers. It's just a matter of you've got a few weirs to sort of make a little bit of ponding now and then. Is that the case?
Well, the weirs on our stretch of the river are more they're just control structures. They're not actually, they hold very little water. I think Boggabilla Weir here, just downstream from us, is probably one of the biggest, and I think it's 5,000 megalitres. So, and due to our soil types, they can't operate it. They have to be very careful when they operate it. If they drop the water out of it too quickly, then the banks slump and things like that. So it's, we really don't have very good control structures up once you get below our dams like Glen and Pindari. So
I think the other thing is the conversations with people in the southern areas and South Australia is the demands for environmental water. There doesn't seem to be any real KPIs in regards to what's it supposed to achieve. It's the song seems to be sung all the time that we need to keep the rivers healthy and all this sort of stuff. But I don't understand how the environment benefits if the water just runs past you on its way to the mouth of the Murray. It doesn't sort of help the environment for off the banks or anything. So what's your take on how to keep rivers healthy, and what you like to see in your area to sort of maybe keep the flows there a little bit longer or more reliable through the year?
A couple of things. I mean, you're exactly right. I've had stand-up arguments with people like Penny Wong, who turned up at the beginning of the Murray Darling Basin process, and they had no idea of what they were trying to achieve. And we kept saying to them, like, if you actually know what you're trying to sort out and you communicate that with people would actually, like, nobody here wants to see a dead river. Like, that's not what that's like, none of us, like, we all live here and we love it. That's why we love it. It's so if the trouble with the whole Murray Darling process was the cart was put before the horse, and off they went on their merry way. And that's why we've got valleys like the Wider and the Macquarie that are over subscribed. They bought more water than they needed because they did it before they actually realised what they actually had to do. And that all came about because it was just a political process. It was just an agreement formed by politicians. South Australia had most of the say because they had most of the politicians who were holding the balance of power at the time. And then once they came up with an agreement on a volume and what they wanted to do, then the science came around, and lo and behold, the science came up with the same numbers that the politicians did. Not quite sure how that happened. And then off we go down their merry way of trying to buy all the water back out of the valleys. And the other thing is with this whole process is that people overestimate our ability to influence the environment, both positively and negatively. It's I meet so many people who are involved in organisations like the Commonwealth Environmental Waterholder and the Murray Darling Basin Authority, and they seem to think that they're going to turn the Darling River back into some green, beautiful river that runs 12 months of the year and nothing ever dies in it. But it's just a pipe dream. You have to be realistic about what the system was in the past and what it is now. It's I don't deny that we have an influence. Of course we do. Everything we do has an influence. But what do we want to do in the world? Do we want to be productive and farm and grow our own food, or what are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve in this country?
Do you think it's got harder? I mean, water is a constitutional responsibility for the states. Do you think it's got harder with the federal government's putting its 10 cents worth, or it's more like the $1.10 in the dollar, saying how things will work? What do you think? You know, we really should, states should push back and get some sort of control back over their own water.
Yep. I mean, like, I've been involved in water policy for 40 years, and I know very little about even my own region, like let alone the south and everything else, because it's so damn complicated that there isn't anybody who knows all about it. It's actually like there's not a single public servant who understands the river from top to bottom. It's so bloody complicated that it's just ludicrous. And I mean, you know, I've been, you know, I sit in a lot of meetings every year and talk about all this stuff, and sometimes I just think, you know, like 40 years ago we were sitting in a similar room discussing similar issues, and you just think, when is it ever going to end? There just seems to be no end game. Nobody has any real idea of where we're going, and it just keeps every time there's a new process, it's a new negotiation, and our position has moved, and so the new negotiation is between our moved position and the new one, and then so we lose a bit, and then the next time it comes around we lose a bit more, and the next one we lose a bit more, and it's and the whole Murray Darling process has been an absolute rort. You know, at least the state processes with our water sharing plans in our rivers up here specify, as the name suggests, a share of the resource. So when there's no water, we don't get any, and neither does anybody else. In the low flows, so in our border river here, we have to have a flow of 10,000 megalitres go through Mungindi over a 2-day period before there's any pumping allowed. So any of the flows below that 10,000 megalitre threshold just pass through our river. Above that threshold, we then share water about 50-50 between irrigators and the environment. And then once we pass, I don't know what the number is, I think it's about 20,000 megs a day, something like that, then irrigators can't pump anymore, and so the rest goes to the environment. So it's actually a very effective tool for managing water and for managing the environment, because because our rivers here are so small. Like the river that I live on is quite an impressive feature when you drive over the bridge, but that's just the town weir that holds water up under the bridge, and it makes it look rather grand. You travel 5 kilometres to the west, and it's just a stream. And once our river gets close to Boomai, the channel capacity is only 3,000 megalitres a day. So if you've got a 50,000 megalitre flow in the border here, you're not going to get 50,000 megalitres past Mungindi. You're only going to get, you know, 5 or 6. So the fact that we might skim 20% off of one of those flows has almost no impact on the flow at Mungindi. So it's I think our water sharing plans, as painful as they were for irrigators, because we had to give up a lot of our access, and in that process there was no compensation. That water was just, that entitlement was just removed from us. Like there was no compensation at all. You know, that's the one good thing about the Murray Darling process, is they buy water from farmers, so the farmer themselves isn't impacted. The impact is felt in our communities when we lose our productive capacity in our communities, and yeah, that's our you know. But our communities don't seem to see it, because it all happens behind closed doors and happens by stealth. So
I remember going and having friends up in Seymour, probably in the early 2000s, probably 2004, something like that, and it wasn't, water used to belong or be allocated to the plot of land, and then I think it was under Howard, they separated the water from the land, so you could have an entitlement, but you could also sell that part of that entitlement to someone else, which I understood for people down sort of on the Goulburn was a pretty good deal, because they were usually pretty flush with water. The natural rainfall, the ground was fairly wet anyway. They didn't really have to draw a lot sometimes, so they could afford to sell it, and it became a commodity, a cash cow for some property owners on the Goulburn. Do you think that was a mistake, separating water entitlements from the actual land and making a commodity now, where we now have a lot of water is owned by hedge funds, or people who are not even farmers?
I think you're probably talking about the southern area more than the north.
Yeah.
Up here. We don't have a lot of that in the north. I don't think it was a mistake. I think certainly for our region, I think it's actually a good thing, because there was water tied up on land that was unproductive land, and it didn't make sense to develop shitty country when there was good country that could be far more productive. I do think a lot of people were a bit naive about what those changes meant, and certainly, one of the things people don't realise about the north is our reliability out of our dams is around about 30%. So we only get about, on average, 30% of our allocation each year, and that's just an average. Generally we either get 100 or we get 0. It's not uncommon for us to have 3 or 4 years in a row where we might only average 2 or 3% of our allocation, which is, when you talk to people in South Australia or Victoria, they just outright don't believe you. So I think there was a lot of people in the southern regions who, like you said, had access to water, probably had plenty of entitlement. Temporary markets were very cheap because there was more water than people needed. And so a lot of people sold their assets and thought they would just buy water on the temporary market, or thought they still had enough entitlement. And then, in the last drought that we've just had, there was all of a sudden there was development in certain industries, and there was, all sorts of things all collided at the one time. Plus we've had the Murray Darling Basin Authority turn up and, transfer huge amounts of our temporary market into the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holders account. So suddenly our temporary market doesn't have the volume that it used to have in it. And then all of a sudden, an area that used to have plenty of water and plenty of cheap water that they could buy if they didn't have the entitlement, that all vanished, and temporary markets went through the roof. Capital values went through the roof. And I mean, to be honest, a lot of people I think are just probably pretty pissed off with themselves that they sold their assets at such low values, and now there's been such incredible capital gains because of the squeeze. I mean, all markets are just controlled by, well, at the end of the day, they're controlled by supply and demand. And if you remove the supply out of a market and the demand grows, then what happens to values? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to work it out.
No, the latest additional flows to the environment, I think it's 450 gigalitres per year out of the basin. Was there any additional cancellation of water entitlements in the northern Murray?
I'm not sure about the Murray, but in the northern valleys up here.
Oh, sorry, Northern Darling.
No, there hasn't been. So the government have been back in the market here. We had another round of tenders recently, but they were pretty unsuccessful. I think they only managed to buy a fraction of what they were hoping to, because they've stripped all the water out of our valleys, and now everybody has, we've all found ourselves effectively with stranded assets. So what do you do? Do you have a farm that's no longer productive, or do everyone's been forced into the market to try and buy water, and there is no water on the supply side. So the prices have gone through the roof here. Like, capital values are just insane, and so the government have turned up and they've decided to try and buy water. And when the tenders came in, they went, can't be right, can't be worth that much. And suddenly they've realised they don't have enough money to actually buy what they want. So that's left us in a position where people like Tanya Plibersek have suggested that she's going to put the boot back onto the state government to try and recoup that water through changes to access rules, and then they'll create themselves an entitlement and hand that back to themselves that they'll use then to supply whatever they feel like later on, which so far, luckily, particularly the New South Wales government have given us a verbal assurance that they won't be part of that, but you know, it's pretty hard to trust anything you get told. Well, once they start floating these ideas, you know.
The other thing is too, if what's the aim of what's the good of environment at buying more water for environmental flows if you actually kill the industry that the water's supposed to be supporting? To me, it's not logical that you deplete the available water to productive purpose for this theoretical requirement of the environment downriver, which in most instances just sees the water pass by and go to the Murray mouth. And like I say, I've never been able to get anyone to give me the KPIs of this. I think it's 3,250 gigalitres per year that's going to be environmental fluids, what it's supposed to actually achieve, and how do you measure the goals? And then if you haven't got the goals to measure and you just somehow South Australia is still not happy, are they going to come back and ask for more water? It seems to be something's just going on, and there's always a possibility that we ain't finished yet.
Oh, we'll never be finished. You know, I know that for a fact. It's water. Water's for fighting over. It'll never change. I think. I mean, you know, like people go on about the management of the Mungindi lakes, and you only have to look back. 10 years ago, Mungindi lakes filled twice in a couple of years, and our bureaucrats and our people who controlled all that, in their wisdom, decided they'd let a lot of that water go, and in an attempt to try and flush out the mouth of the Murray. So not only did they dump a whole more water than they should have out of Mungindi lakes, and they did that on top of what was already wasn't a major flood, but there was plenty of water in the Murray at the time as well. They did that twice in a few years, and all they did was empty the lakes, and they didn't achieve anything because the Murray is such a modified system, and so is the mouth. There's nothing natural about the mouth of the Murray anymore with the amount of infrastructure that's down there. And they still haven't learnt their lesson. They still think that they can buy more water and open the mouth of the Murray and turn the Darling River green 12 months of the year. So,
but the other thing is too, especially on the Murray itself, the amount of water they're saying that they're putting into environmental flows can't actually pass down the river without overflowing the banks and water. The Barmo choke just doesn't let you send that volume down, and there's a couple of other points that are fairly restricted and results in overbank floods, which doesn't do the environment that much good anyway, because there's two things that happen. A lot of the standing trees get waterlogged for long periods of time, and the other thing is when the water comes back into the river, it's dirty. It's got all the silt and that, and then it causes death of a lot of plant life and that on the riverbed, and basically chokes it up and makes it very difficult for native fish and that as well. So we sort of are putting all this extra water down in some instances, and it's doing very little good to the river run itself. But then when you get down to the lower lakes in South Australia, I've had this conversation with Ken Jury, and he's an investigative journalist. And basically he's pushing the idea, well, keep the barrages, but use seawater to keep the lakes at the constant level that they need to provide the amenity and keep the, it's got a lot of acidic soil in the lower lakes. They need to be covered by water at most time. Otherwise, if they actually dried out, you'd have a lot of acidic problems. So you need that flow. But they're basically saying, well, it was originally an estuarine environment. Just return it to that estuarine environment. Keep the levels controlled by the barrages, but use seawater and stop taking the water from productive people like yourself and the growers in the lower Murray Darling Basin in Victoria. But no one seems to. This is what I'm saying. It doesn't seem to be a KPI exactly for what they're trying to achieve with this water flow.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, and I mean, early days of the Murray Darling Basin plan, there was water that they bought, and that water did do good things. But now, as you say, I mean, the Barmah Choke used to carry, I think it was about 11,000 megalitres a day, but because they've been shoving so much water through that Barmah Choke for almost 12 months of the year now, because it's because trying to deliver water for irrigators and trying to deliver water to the environment, they run that river at such a high level that the amount of sand that's built up through the choke now, I think they're back to, it's about 8,000 megalitres a day. So they've lost about 30% of the capacity of the choke because they just run it full all the time. And so the more water that they buy, the more they've got to push through there, the more damage they do. And the only way they can get through there is to raise the level, and then the water ends up in the forest, as you say, and they do more damage than the good that they do downstream. So it is just lunacy, what they're trying to achieve at the moment. And we find that in the north here now with like there's a lot of controversy over the conversion of floodplain harvesting or overland flow. All they've done is give us volumetric entitlements and account volumes, and all that'll happen is we'll run out of account volumes in the middle of a flood. So we'll stop pumping in the middle of a flood when we have no impact on the water running past us anyway, and we'll be forced to try and get access to lower flow, water and lower flows in the river. So they're actually, like, the whole thing is actually counterproductive now. They're actually doing, like, you just can't believe some of the crap they come up with sometimes.
Well, the thing that worries me is we used to have people in the field from the Department of Agriculture and all those sort of things in West. I come from West Australia. We used to have ag people out in the fields in the wheat belt doing experiments and working with the farmers. That was sort of common all over Australia. And you had all these people, field experts, they had years and years of experience. But the science that seems to be coming out that pushing this seems to be a little bit askew from people who have been actually working in the field, say, for 30 or 40 years, that they're sort of at loggerheads. And like you say, with the volumes that are going down the rivers, it's scouring the banks. I mean, if you go to the Murray, the water skiers in particular complain about it, where they used to have be able to sort of put their boat in or walk into the river because it was a nice low level, and now the banks are so cut. There's great big drops. There's more trees going into the river and blocking, fouling it up. So it seems that the people who are providing the expertise seem to be a little bit counterproductive.
Yeah, I mean, the Murray is just a highly modified system. Like the river never ran. I mean, the Murray River runs pretty much at the same level all the time, apart from when you get a flood go down it and it goes up and then comes back down to the same level. That was never how the Murray ran. It always ran with the winter rainfall, and that's the forestry used to get wet. Like the water used to push down the Murray, and then things would steady up, and it was always changing. Whereas now it's just maintained with so many weirs and so much infrastructure all up and down the river. But people, I mean, you've just got to ask yourself, what do you want? It's
Well, this is the thing.
You just can't have both. You can't. So
Yeah,
I
this
don't.
one
And I
because
mean, I don't pretend to be an expert on the southern regions. I've been down there a few times, but I don't know all there is to know about it. That's for sure.
But the other thing, even up in your area, you'd have people who have, expertise for years and experience and lived in the area and got a lot of valuable information and how things have run in the past. But do you think their information, their submissions, and their knowledge is not being taken into account properly by the powers that be? And do we, how do we address this if you haven't got members of parliament who support you in getting these things across?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, as I said right at the very beginning, it's got nothing to do with science. It's got nothing to do with community consultation. Doesn't occur anymore. It's just all they talk about community consultation, but all it is an information dump. They just turn up and tell us what they want to tell us, and then they leave. They never they don't actually listen. Nobody actually listens to anybody anymore. It's just all about politics, and we live in safe seats. So the LNP is, to be honest, it's actually easier to deal with Labor governments than LNP governments these days. So that doesn't give you much heart when the people who are supposed to be on your side are bloody more incompetent than the other lot. So
that's sad.
But it really is all about politics. It has nothing to do with science. It has nothing to do with reason anymore. It's all about politics.
Okay, I'll just chuck up another screen here to give people a bit of perspective of Australian rainfall. This is mainland Australia. For all its song and dance, the Murray Darling only gets about 6% of the Australian rainfall, and so that works out in regards to mainland Australia. Its rainfall only represents about 5% of the total. Meanwhile, up here in northern Australia, we have the lion's share. We have about 80% of mainland Australia's rainfall. But unfortunately, we haven't got the population that's farming and damming it and sort of using the water. Maybe we sort of need some vision in regards to water projects long term to sort of start rectifying some of these problems with water distribution, because I don't think we have a water issue. We have a vision and a will problem in regards to water projects.
Yeah, I mean, I love a lot of these projects that get talked about all the time, but unfortunately, we live in an environment at the moment where it's user pays, and it's the direct user, not all of them. So for us in agriculture, every time anybody talks about infrastructure, they want us to pay. They want us to pay for the entire cost, and then they want us to pay. So even the dams that we have here now, like when we pay our fees, we have to pay for the cost of the dam, and we have to pay the government a return on their investment. So we actually and that's just all by the farmer, the initial consumer. It's not. So as long as that's still the case, then there's no point in building those systems, because we just can't afford as an individual to pay that for the water. So unless people are going to do it for the good of the nation rather than the good of a few, then there's not even any point talking about it.
I think the governments have lost their way in regards to what they're supposed to do in regards to nation building. I mean, if you go back when we actually had statesmen instead of politicians, you look at the example with West Australia, and it was only become a self-governing colony in about 1890. I think it was about 4 years later, Sir John Forrest, his government managed to get it passed and go out and borrow £2.5 million in those days, which equates to $40 billion today, to build 2 dams in the Darling Ranges in Perth, put in 500 kilometres of a pipeline and 4 pumping stations, to Kalgoorlie. Now, that was 125 years ago. That infrastructure is still there, and Kalgoorlie and the Eastern Goldfields is still producing massive wealth for Western Australia and Australia in general. They didn't sit around and say, well, we've got to make sure the miners up there pay for all this infrastructure before we start. No, the government took it on that we're building a sort of, well, a state project, a state building project. But we've got the same problem in northern Queensland now. We've got a lot of farmers up here who sort of, have started small projects, need dams built to make those things go bigger. But the cost benefits analysis, what they seem to work out, the government wants the money repaid by the supposed users. There's no sort of thinking that the government's providing a long time provision that's going to benefit the state, the whole state and the country. It's just, we want this return. And for one of our dams up here at the Naringla Dam, when they was talking about that, they wanted to want the return in 30 years. And that put the price of water around about $5,000 a megalitre. You're not going to go in and open up land if you've got to pay $5,000 a megalitre and you're not sure what return you're going to get. It beggars belief. I don't think the governments know what their role is anymore.
Oh, totally. This country's biggest problem is the fact that we spend all of our money on the public service trying to make sure that nobody wastes anything. So we waste hundreds of billions of dollars making sure we don't waste anything. It's a bit like drought subsidies. They spend more money making sure people don't get it that shouldn't get it. They'd be better off just coming out and just handing everybody $1,000 check. It'd be more efficient. At least there'd be more money in the community rather than just creating another bureaucracy and another lot of people that you're paying to make sure that somebody doesn't get money they shouldn't have. Our government's answer to everything is to create a new bureaucracy, and we're just overrun by this. We're just overrun by bureaucrats who are all paid quite handsomely. They've got massive superannuation entitlements. They've got, and so now we've got superannuation companies who have more money than anyone else in this country. So they're the ones starting to pull the strings. So people. You really do wonder where this country's going. It's kind of.
And the other thing is, you're talking about $1,000 for people in the communities to spend around the communities, but with these bureaucrats, you're talking about you've got a hierarchy running around about the $300,000 for the boss, and then you have 20 or 30 people under that got around about the 200,000. Then you've got all the underlings on 100,000. And the thing is, they're all in Brisbane or in New South Wales. They're in Sydney. And they're spending their money in Sydney or overseas, because they can well afford to go overseas. It doesn't bring any benefit where the production actually is. It doesn't bring anything into those communities, and this is a lot of the problems.
Well, I don't know if you've been to Brisbane lately, but I'm not sure what it's called. There's one waterfront place or something. Is that the government building down there? Holy smokes, that is a monstrosity, that bloody thing. And the people that walk in and out of it, you sit there in the foyer and you just man, if they're the people running the place, any wonder it's a shit show. And then now they're building another building beside it that's even bigger. And then they build themselves a bridge so that they can get across the river and go and have lunch over bloody, whatever it's called on the other side of the creek. So
Point or something.
Yeah. So this is where all our bloody money goes. That's why we can't afford to look after people in aged care centres or anything else, because we've spent it all on these people who are doing fuck all in Brisbane. It's I don't know. They're just it's. Our public service is going to be the undoing of this country.
It's the biggest growing industry in Australia.
Well, Canberra's our fastest growing city, isn't it? And it's all public service.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Canberra, because it's actually I think it was 2019 election, it actually got its third seat in the House of Representatives because it's grown so much. And now you've got people like Pocock and a few others are pushing for more senators for the ATC and Northern Territory. Imagine another couple of David Pococks. How well the regions would do, eh? Because if there's ever a person who beats the hell out of the regions and productivity, it'd be David Pocock and his crowd. He's Climate 200 people.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, we've got mainly Labor governments in this country, federally and state, and the Greens are in bed with the Labor Party so bad that it's not funny, and the Greens. Well, and they're both the same, really. So the Greens, they want to let every person in the world who doesn't have a home or anything into this country. So they want our population needs to explode. But what are you going to do if you've got a big population? You've got to build houses. So who the hell's going to build all the houses? And then you've got to feed them. So we've got to farm more country, but you can't knock down a tree and you can't use any water. So, like what are we all going to do? Like, we're all just going to eat each other. Like, it's I mean, what do you talk about looking for an end game. I mean, what the hell is their end game? It just doesn't make any sense.
You just need to farm renewable energy, and you can knock down as many trees as you like.
Yeah, you're right. That's how we should get around tree clearing rules.
Okay,
start a solar farm and just have a short term one. And
well, you've got one of those coming into your area too. I understand.
Yeah.
Just getting off the water and onto cotton, can you give us a bit of an idea what the sort of production for cotton is today compared to when it started off? How cotton productions fares now in regards to water usage and that? Because I remember there used to be a lot of controversy about water usage for the cotton industry took. But I also noticed there's a lot of people up here, in Northern Territories growing cotton. There's some in Northern Queensland, and there's a few other places that want to get into cotton now. And there's varieties that can grow in drier environments. So how's the cotton industry, say, changed in the last 20 years in regards to productivity, types of cotton, or has there been any sort of changes in the variety of the plants and the water usage?
I mean, the cotton, one of the reasons I love the cotton industry is it's been such a progressive industry. I mean, when we first started growing cotton, there was our yields were like 1.5 to 2 bales to the acre, and every plant suffered from every disease and every insect. Like everything just seemed to want to kill it. But through our breeding programs and everything else, we now produce probably 3 times as much product from the same amount of area and the same amount of water. So we've become more efficient with water, with our infrastructure, and the way we monitor our water use and the way we control our water flows. The times that you have to, when we irrigate a field, we don't just run water from one end to the other. We take notice of what sort of soil type it is. We look at our deep drainage, and then we control the amount of water going into each row so that we get the right amount of run time. Some soil types you want your rows to run through in 8 hours, some you want 10, some you want 12. So we've become a lot more efficient with our water, but the biggest change is that we're so much more productive with the same amount of water. So as an industry now, cotton is off the same amount of water and the same amount of land, we produce 3 to 4 times as much production from that same resource. And that's been the biggest change in the cotton industry, because we grow grains and we grow livestock and everything else as well, but there just hasn't been that improvement in production in any of our other industries that the cotton industry has seen. So that's probably one of the biggest differences with the cotton industry.
I also noticed, because I looked up your gin there, and there's been a few videos and that. They don't seem to be overly cotton gin doesn't seem to be overly impressive. It's just a shed with some machinery in it, but obviously, but yeah, there's not a lot of pipes and there's not a lot of stuff in it. It's not sort of like it's not like you imagine, sort of, you know, an old mill with a lot of people in there or something. It seems to be fairly spacious and airy and bright. But I also saw aerial shots, and you've got huge amounts of bales sitting outside of it. Now, obviously, the machines harvest the cotton off the plants and then roll them up into those big rolls.
Modules. Yep.
Modules. Okay, modules. Handling those things must be, you know, a bit tricky size-wise and that. But what actually happens when you drag those modules into the cotton gin itself? Well, how are they sort of handled, and are they thrown in some sort of hopper, minus the plastic, of course, or how's it fed into the mill itself to get the seeds out and that?
Yeah, yep. So, so the round modules are actually pretty easy to handle. They're about 2.5 tonne each, so just an average size front end loader handles them quite easily, and we just stack 6 of them on a trailer and 2 trailers on a truck, and off they go into the gin. So so they're actually, you know, they're actually very easy to handle now in the round form. And then when we to gin, a cotton gin is pretty much a cleaning plant. Yeah, 99% of what's in a cotton gin is cleaning equipment. So so the modules come into the front of the gin. We take the plastic off, obviously, because we don't want, you know, plastic's a pretty big contaminant. So we want we don't want that in there. And then it goes into what we call, you know, we've just got a bunch of rollers with spikes on them, and they just you know, break the module up into a we're just trying to break it up so that we can then feed it through smoothly through all the cleaning, drying, and ginning process. So, but yeah, I mean, a cotton gin it cleans the plant. We try and break the lint up. We try and break it, you know, we try and what we call singulate it. So we're trying to get each individual seed into its own, you know, the lint grows off the seed. So we're trying to get each seed into a singulated form, and that way when it runs through the cotton, the gin, it's easier to pull the lint from the seed, and so that we can, you know, maximise our productivity.
We're talking to some people up here trying to get a gin, but there's always seems to be a little problem these days with native titles and things like that, and makes it, you know, 10 times too hard. But with the varieties they're talking about, is the seeds are useful. You can either press them for oil or something like that, or feedstock. But also the remnants they're talking about the remnants that are left in the field. You can actually use some of that to feed cattle. So, like a cotton plant, it doesn't grow another bunch of cotton next year. You actually got to plant another seed. Is that right?
Cotton's actually it's a member of the hibiscus family, so it will grow on. It will grow again next year, but it doesn't perform very well. So the most efficient way, and that's the reason why cotton is such a perfect crop for here. When we've got water, we plant cotton, and when we don't have water, we don't plant cotton. So it allows us to take advantage of water when there's water here, and it allows us not to be stuck with a tree or a grapevine or something else that needs to survive in a dry spell. We just don't plant cotton. So, but no. So we plant our cotton each year because it's the first year of growth is its most productive. We don't try and grow it on for a second year. It's not viable. So and the trouble, if you do try and grow your cotton over, you end up harbouring insects and disease and all sorts of pests, and it's not a long-term solution.
So what do you think is probably the best innovation in the last 20 years for the cotton industry in Australia?
Probably two things. Probably our improvement in our irrigation techniques and efficiency, and our harvesting. The cotton pickers now that build it into a round module, that's revolutionised our business. So unfortunately, it takes a lot of employment out of our communities, but I don't think our governments want us to employ anyone anymore. They make it so bloody hard that we do everything we can to employ less and less people every year. So
Yeah, well, they seem to be pretty intent on doing that in the mines as well at the moment, with robotics and that. I don't know where we're going to have jobs in the future if we keep going down this path. But
the public service, mate, it'll grow fast enough to absorb them all.
But the thing is, we'll probably run out of your money to pay them.
We've already run out of our money. Like we're just printing the stuff, and like there's no. We've gone well past the point of running out of money. That's, jeez.
That's no good. In regards to what you see as the people who can best help the farmers in your area and in general, how do you sort of, or how do you work in regards to lobbying politicians and others in the power to be to sort of at least get on the same page as you are for your industry in general? Is there a lot of like peak bodies and that sort of do the legwork, or is it a lot of case it's just through local groups and local members? Not that you've got that many.
Well, unfortunately, that's the problem. Like, we're employing less people, and our farms are growing in size, and so there's less of us. And the fewer of us there are, then the less representation we have in politics, and it's a bit of a never-ending cycle. So, I mean, our advocacy work is so ineffective now because, like, as I keep saying it, the whole water space is all about politics. It's not about outcomes. It's not about productivity. It's not about anything else anymore. It's just it's another tool. It's another bargaining chip that they use, and we're just the pawns in their game, unfortunately. And until we can get some political until we get any kind of political control, and I just don't know how we're ever going to change it.
Well, I can tell you how that happens. I mean, our forefathers had that in mind when they wrote the Constitution. They gave you a whole chapter. It's called Chapter 6, New States. We were never supposed to stay as we were. So the only way to wrestle your area from Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne for the regional people is create a new state as per the Constitution. But that's another kettle of fish. In regards to moving forward, do you think needs to be a bit more of a get together between the people in South Australia, Victoria, southern Murray Basin, the northern Murray Basin, and try to get some sort of clarity on exactly what people want to try to achieve? Because, like I keep harping on about, I can't see anyone talking about any KPIs that you can sort of measure against and say, well, we're just wasting our time. We're never going to achieve these pipe dreams, and we just need to be a bit more practical in our application.
Well, you're a bit like us, Bill. You keep looking for you keep looking for a reason, or but you're not sort of listening to the fact that it doesn't. None of this has anything to do with real life. It's all just about politics, and and until we can change that, it's just nothing's going to change.
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't sound too hopeful. All I can hope is that Ken Urey and his mob down in South Australia do have a bit of a success in returning the lower lakes to estuarine environment. We might take some pressure off the water environment need for environmental flows in the Murray Darling.
Yeah, and I mean, probably one of our most effective advocacy things we've done in the last, it's probably decade or two, is to try. We try and welcome anybody from the southern areas to actually come up and see what we do, because I've travelled down the river and I've met people in particularly South Australia, but people who live, mostly people who live on the Murray and are used to fairly high security water. And when you tell them what our access to water is, they just cannot believe how poor our access is. They just really do not understand until they see it. So the more people we can get up here to actually see what we do and understand how different our system is, because the only way we're ever going to sort anything out is to actually come together. And unfortunately, people in agriculture proved to be very not very good at coming together, shall we say, and we become our own worst enemies, and we end up with these splinter groups down south that do more harm to everybody. And they just until we can stop all that nonsense, we just really don't have any hope.
I think, like I say, I mean, I just don't think people understand that the Murray Darling Basin only gets 6% of the Australian rainfall anyway. So you're not playing with not playing with a lot of water, unlike us in northern Queensland. Like, we're drowning in the stuff at the moment. Well, I think December we had 600 around the Cairns, and this area we had 600 mils. 400 mils, 200 mils, and we're approaching 800 mils this month.
Yes.
That must make you very envious if you had those sort of rainfall. But we do have a big problem with this misconception that the Murray Darling Basin is somehow some great huge pond of water, and it's not. It's only 6%, and it's spread out over a massive area. So I think people's expectations are really sort of off in fairyland. Yeah,
you're 100% right. People's expectations about what it is, and people's expectations about what they can turn it into. With anybody who thinks a bunch of public servants in the Murray Darling Basin Authority can fix our river, like, seriously,
I think we're
far out.
Yeah, I think we're all stumped. We don't seem to be making any progress with this, because I think there's a narrative that's got to be followed, that's being followed by the government, and that's all there is about it. There's no leeway, and it's a fait accompli, and they're not going to enter in any real meaningful discussions for anyone. So that's unfortunate.
But, I mean, we really have reached a point now where the more, and one of the things that our federal government did recently is to actually remove the requirement to do a socio-economic study on future buybacks. That was one of the negotiations. It was one of the things that were given up in the negotiations to try and extend the time frame to recover this water. So now it's not even required that they even think about the impact on communities. Like, I mean, this is our government that's supposed to be running our country. Like, I'm flabbergasted. I just really don't even know what to say about.
It's not running.
These are the.
It's not running it for us. It's running it for some narrative or ideals that's sort of beyond us. But like I say, I mean, that you look, a lot of communities are looking down the barrel. If the farmers haven't got enough water, they've basically got to leave the land. And for small communities, if farmers leave the land, well, then people who provide your fuel, people who supply your maintenance, people who supply your food, they start to be impacted, and the whole thing starts to wither. And you can lose communities basically within probably a year or so. They can just wither and die.
Well, our region here, we've lost most of our small towns. Like none of our small towns have a post office or a shop or a school or any of those sorts of things anymore. Like all of our Weimars and the like, they've all died. There's just a few houses there that a few people live in, and that's it. And now our medium-sized towns are starting to suffer the same decline, or not starting. They've been in decline for ages, and we've only got really Gundawindi's the only town that's really bucking the trend. It's otherwise we're just in a never-ending decline, and it's no way to live. It's no way to bring your children up, or our kids want to take over our business. They love farming as well, but I mean, sometimes you wonder what you're giving them. Like it's far out. I mean, what do you?
Yeah. Well, I get the impression that there's a strategic regression of the regions. That's all I can sort of put it down to. Like in Queensland, northern Queensland, we've got the fishermen, basically being driven out of business by different regulations from quotas, bans on gill nets. We'll see a major impact in the Gulf country very soon as the gill net ban hits. We might lose the whole town of Corumba, basically because they can't fish out of there anymore with their fleet without gill netting. So it seems to be a problem in all primary industry sectors that we're not loved or wanted.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's a bit like you said earlier on. All the people that are shutting us down don't live in these areas. Like they all live in Sydney or Canberra, but want to shut down the rest of the country. I mean, the Murray Darling Basin Authority was supposed to run an office of, I think there was 14 or 15 people were supposed to be in an office in Gundawindi here. They can't keep more than one person in that office. And I mean, Gundawindi's one of the most vibrant towns in our region. It is the most vibrant town in our region, and they can't get anyone to work there because people just can't stand the work. Like they just don't, they don't believe in it. They don't. And yet they just keep on doing the same things, and so they just put all the jobs back in Canberra. So we have more people in Canberra that are even more disconnected from what we're trying to do, and it's just. I mean, I don't know how much time you spend in Canberra, but every time I go down there, I just get bloody depressed. It's such a shithole. Like, God.
They're so disconnected. It's unbelievable. And then you sort of start read things. Well, if they look at they monitor the water for drug usage, and it's one of the highest usage of cocaine in Australia is in Canberra. So it's a bit of a worry, and the people.
Well, that's what they have to do. Even our public servants, they must know on some level like how ridiculous the whole thing is, and obviously they do if they're taking that much bloody coke to try and make their lives worth living. So,
okay, look, we've gone over the hour and we're sort of going off topic. I really like to thank you for coming on, Glenn. If you can just hold on line for a little bit, I'll introduce next week's show. And it plays onto the same sort of subject about regression of the regions, and we'll have a chat off air.
Got it.
Thanks very much, Glenn. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please join us again next Wednesday, and I'll have Anthony Rayner on. He's the Mayor of Longreach, and we'll be discussing the buy-up of productive land for the protected estates areas in Queensland, which is seeing productive properties, especially cattle properties at the moment, being bought up, and then actually all the infrastructure bulldozed, including fencing, water points, outbuildings, and basically the land just turned back to a bare earth situation, which is supposedly good for the environment. But I think you'll find it's only good for noxious weeds and feral animals in the future. So that's what we'll be discussing next week, the actions of the Queensland government to buy productive land and return it back to year zero. So please join me again next week. Thank you.